Thanks very much, Program Director, and greetings to all the delegates that are at this conference. I guess, yeah, I must be careful and not step this line because at least the light is really good here, because when you're as dark as me, if I speak like where Christo was standing, you'll probably just see my white shirt, so I'll disappear. I'm going to be talking particularly about the work that we're doing as the HRDC in bringing together the private sector, particularly to be involved in the skills development game, but also how we fund, especially the higher education system in the country. And maybe I'll preface that by saying, I chair the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, and we fund more than 500,000 students, about just over 240,000 at universities and about 270,000 at TVET colleges. And government, especially after the announcement by former President Zuma on the 16th of December, that students that come from poor and working class backgrounds are now going to get fee-free education, especially at universities, because the TVET students were already getting free education. A lot of people thought, well, why do we need the private sector to play a role in funding, given that government is making this concession and allocating huge resources? Minister Gallagher announced a budget, an additional budget of 57 billion rand when he delivered the budget speech just 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago. But the reality of the situation is that there's still a significant amount of money that is required in that system, in the higher education system, particularly, and I'm just going to stick to the TVET colleges and the universities, and I'm not going to touch on the community colleges. So there's still a significant amount of not just money required, but involvement of all the stakeholders in the production of skills that we need in the country. So that's why in my presentation today, we'll talk about what we call ikusasa Student Financial Aid Program, which is a private sector initiative which seeks to work together with government in the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, plus obviously the Department of Higher Education and Training, and the institutions in addressing the skills requirements in the country. And who is this FAP? So when I got appointed as the chair of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, it was at the height of the #FeesMustFall movement in 2015. And it was quite clear that there were a lot of broken things in NSFAS. For instance, the high dropout rates that we experience, we continue to experience of students that are funded by NSFAS. And the fact that NSFAS only asks one question, do you come from a poor working class family? They don't ask, we don't ask, what skills you're going to be pursuing, where you're going to be doing those, and so on. And obviously it means that we continue to fund a lot of students, not out of their own doing, that may be doing programs that lead to nowhere, if they do graduate, because a lot of them don't. So if you just look at the system in terms of TVET colleges and universities, probably you have about 300,000 students that exit, either through graduation or through dropouts every single year. And out of those, especially those that do graduate, we're increasing the numbers of unemployed graduates because a lot of them may be doing degrees or programs that lead to nowhere. In other words, if they are lucky, they may end up working in a restaurant with a degree because the degree which they did is not preparing them for the world of work, for the skill which they should have obtained. Just earlier on today, I was speaking just before this conference started. I was speaking to Tlau Mohlahwa, who was at the HRDC Festo stand. So Tlau did an NCV plus an 80s, he's done N6 at Eguruleni West. Now, Chloe spent about 4 years, and he's one of the more successful students, and is right here. And I'm sure that some of those typical kind of students who may be here or may have gone through the same route. So he did an NCV for 2 years. Then he started N4 and N5 and is now N6. And he spent 5 years in the system. The NATED programs, the Report 191 programs, which are offered by TVET colleges, I must say, I'm going to use very harsh words, are useless. Allow them. Because the curriculum of the NATED programs has not been adjusted in certain areas since post-war, since 1947. So, I mean, you tell me, you talk about the fourth industrial revolution, and he's very lucky, though, because, Festo gave him an opportunity. So he's now manning a stand showing off the equipment which manufactures components using robotics technology. But Ekurhuleni West was nowhere near preparing him by teaching him and training him for the skill that he really needs, that the automotive industry really needs. So Festo has had to retrain him on what the real technology today in 2018 looks like and how it actually operates. So, and this applies, I'm just using this anecdote of Klo, but we have 700,000 students at TVET colleges that are doing NATED degrees or qualifications or the National Certificate Vocational, whose lives are actually being destroyed because they are doing things that are not relevant. So what we're trying to do through ISFAP is to bring the private sector together to work with government and institutions to do a whole lot of things, and I'll touch on that. And because what we want to do is to make sure that young people can have a chance and a meaningful participation in the economy. Whether they become entrepreneurs, and it's one of the most important issues, and Christo just talked about agropreneurs, because we can't, just like what apartheid did to us, go to universities or colleges because all of us want to look for a job. We must be job creators. We have to produce entrepreneurs as well. So if you look at the NDP, of course we have the triple challenges that we face as a country of unemployment, inequality, and poverty. So as ISFAP pulling the private sector together, we're saying, how do we make sure that we're aligning ourselves to the goals and the objectives of the National Development Plan by producing the kind of skills that are going to help grow our economy in South Africa, but also make a contribution to our continental economy as well as the global economy as such. These are the sustainable development goals that South Africa signs up to. And obviously, one of the critical issues that we face is the issue of unemployment, inequality, and poverty. But if we are spending the kind of money as a country that we are spending in producing skills that lead to dead ends, clearly, not only are we wasting our limited resources, but we're destroying the lives of millions of students that either do not graduate, not because of their own doing, or if they graduate, they're not prepared for the real world. So if you look at South Africa, we've adopted a system which says higher education in terms of our constitution, unlike basic education, in terms of our constitution, there's a core funding arrangement in higher education. So in other words, the universities and the TVET colleges get, yes, funding and allocations from the fiscus, but it is not just the fiscus that makes budgets and allocations to the higher education. We need the private sector as well. I've just put up a slide which shows the university funding split. So you can see that government puts in about 50% or thereabouts, and the private sector and fees, then contributes a balance of the 50%. So there's a continued need for the private sector to play a role here, despite the fact that Mr. Gigaba has allocated an additional 57 billion rand. And by the way, that 57 billion is over 3 years. So if you look at the annual requirement in terms of expenditure, in terms of funding, we need somewhere in the region of about 60 billion rand a year. And government, with the additional allocation, is probably moving to about 25 billion. So there's still a huge gap to fund our institutions, especially the TVET colleges and the universities properly. So the objectives here is to align the interest of the private sector, employers, with institutions, with those of government. So if you look at just how this works, and I'll skip the slide. So we have the National Student Financial Aid Scheme on the left-hand side, and then we have ISFAP on the right-hand side. The idea is that these two work together to address some of the constraints that we have, which one of the key ones is just how students drop out. And students drop out, even if you fund students and you give them 100% of the funding. If they are doing wrong programs, they're not given, there's not proper readiness when they come from school, when they qualify from matric or grade 9 or whatever the case may be, they're still going to fail even if you're giving them proper funding. So what we're doing is to provide what we call wraparound support, which includes additional academic support, social support, psychological support, and practical training to improve the work readiness of the students in the system. So we're already working in 12 universities and with one TVET college. And I say one TVET college, why out of 50 TVET colleges? Because we can't just keep pumping money into a system that doesn't work. So until we have had a proper reform of the curriculum, of the resources in the TVET colleges, of training the lecturers and so on, which we've now started working with DHET on, we can't really work in that system in a proper way. So we've got to fund students properly, but make sure that we are setting them up to succeed and graduate because they're making the right kind of choices. So, and the bottom line here is that we're organizing, all the key stakeholders, the institutions, in other words, the universities and the TVET colleges, with the private sector, working with government to align all of our objectives so that we're producing the skills that are required in our economy, as opposed to a very haphazard and uncoordinated way in terms of how all these different stakeholders work together. One of the programs that we started, for instance, we started at Orbit, is to address the issues of curriculum, is to look at, what should be done with the NCVs and the NATED programs, working in terms of the national plan for post-school education, as well as the white paper of post-school education, to align all of these interests so that as a country we're producing the skills that we're going to need for our economy. So the value proposition here is to make sure that we're providing proper support to students, we're working with institutions, we are working with the government to solve all of these problems relating to the production of skills. And we started working with the professional bodies because we need the professionals, so working with engineers, with actuaries, with medical or the health sciences, with the accountants and so on, to make sure that the professional bodies also play a very important role in aligning all of these interests, because very often you find that some of these professional bodies may not have addressed the issues of transformation. Some of them, if you just take, for instance, the actuaries, why do we have so few, black or African actuaries in the country? We need a lot more. So it's making sure that some of these professional bodies also understand and are encouraged to participate, especially when it comes to the production of skills from students that come from poor and working class background. So we started last year, and if you look at just the successes of producing engineers and so on, having started, modestly last year, but we're seeing the results already in terms of the graduation rates, especially in the critical skills areas, what is called the occupations in high demand, which are gazetted by the Department of Higher Education and Training. So there's a lot of funding, and we're busy working with DTI at the moment to revise the generic codes that are going to allow for companies to make a contribution towards the support of students so that you can have match funding with what government is allocating to NSFAS, so that we can have a lot more students that are given an opportunity to qualify, especially if you address all of the other issues. And just the additional funding that we're talking about here, that should be coming from the private sector. You can see we're targeting to raise at least 10 billion rand, growing to about 22 billion rand from the private sector, to be able to play a meaningful role in this cost-sharing arrangement. These are just some of the companies and organizations already that are participating in this, and they include members of Business Leadership South Africa, as well as other private sector who are making a significant contribution in the funding. So we are well on track. So as I said, we started with 7 universities last year. We're now in 12 universities. And the idea is that, hopefully by next year, we should cover all the 26 public universities. And then we'll start, having some impact in terms of how the TVET system itself works, working with all the different stakeholders to sort that system out. Because, South Africa is very lopsided. We have a lot more people who want to go to university, whereas we need a lot of technical skills or skills that should be produced by the TVET colleges. But if the TVET colleges continue just, or government continues funding the report 191 or native progress NCVs, the way that they are, we're wasting resources in the country. So we've got to sort that system out. Thank you.